Ever feel like you're just drowning? In noise, I mean.
Oh,
It's like you're always on end,
yeah.
bombarded by notifications and deadlines and just the intensity of modern life. I know I do. And that's why today we're going deep on something that I think has become more vital than ever. Retreating from society.
It's not about becoming a hermit, though,
Right.
or like dropping off the grid completely.
Exactly. It's about, well, strategically stepping back, finding ways to recharge
Yeah.
and rediscovering that elusive sense of peace,
Yeah.
amidst all the chaos. And trust me, this is for everyone. This isn't just for like monks and mystics. This is for you, the listener. Anyone out there who's juggling a million things,
Mm-hmm.
feeling the pressure
Mm-hmm.
and wondering if there's like a way to just find a little more quiet.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how our brains are wired. We're just bombarded with so much stimulation these days. Everything from like the flashing lights of Times Square to the like constant pings of our smartphones. I mean, our nervous systems are basically in overdrive 24/7.
It's true. I remember this one time I was prepping for this huge presentation. I was up late, like mainlining coffee. My apartment looked like, honestly, like a tornado had gone through it. Sticky notes and research papers everywhere.
Wow.
And I felt at the time like I was killing it, like I was being super productive until, well, I completely crashed.
Ah, classic burnout. And it's so common, especially with our, always on culture. But here's the thing. Real productivity, the kind that leads to long-term success and fulfillment that actually requires periods of rest
Yeah.
and rejuvenation.
So we're actually hurting ourselves by trying to be on all the time.
In a way, yeah, think of it like a muscle. You can't just constantly work it out without giving it time to, recover and grow stronger. And it's the same with our minds and our nervous systems, too. We need those periods of downtime to process information, integrate experiences, and just replenish our energy.
Okay, so who exactly needs a retreat? Is this for everyone or just people in like super high stress jobs?
Honestly, I think it's for anyone who feels that sense of overwhelm, of being stretched too thin. Think about the urban dweller, constantly bombarded by noise and crowds, or the professional, like we talked about, juggling deadlines and expectations, feeling like they're, always on that hamster wheel. Even digital natives who are, practically plugged into the matrix 24/7, they need to unplug and recharge too.
It's funny you mentioned digital natives. I was reading this study recently about how social media use is actually linked to like increased anxiety and depression. It's like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, striving for this unattainable image of perfection. No wonder we feel exhausted.
Absolutely. And it's not just social media either. It's the constant influx of information, the pressure to be in the know. It all takes a toll. News, opinions, updates, it can feel impossible to switch off.
So how do we combat this? How do we actually start incorporating retreats into our lives
Yeah.
without quitting our jobs and moving to a cave?
Well, the good news is it doesn't have to be extreme. It's about finding those small pockets of stillness, throughout the day, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Ooh, give me some examples. I am all about actionable advice.
Okay, well, for starters, think about your morning routine. Could you maybe carve out, I don't know, even just 10 minutes to sit in silence, maybe with a cup of tea, and just be present with your breath?
I've tried meditation before,
Hmm.
and I always felt like I was doing it wrong. Like my mind just wouldn't shut up.
That's so common. And honestly, the point of meditation isn't to empty your mind completely. It's more about noticing your thoughts, without getting carried away by them. Think of it like watching clouds, drift by. You acknowledge them, but you don't chase after them.
Okay, that's a really helpful analogy. I can picture that.
And don't underestimate the power of nature. Even a short walk in the park, paying attention to like the sights, sounds, smells, that can do wonders for your mental clarity and emotional well-being.
Oh, I'm a big believer in nature walks. There's just something about being surrounded by trees and fresh air that just makes me feel calmer, you know, more grounded.
Yeah, there's actually a scientific basis for that too. Studies have shown that spending time in nature can like reduce stress hormones, like cortisol, and improve our mood. There's even a Japanese practice called forest bathing that's all about immersing yourself in the sensory experience of being in the woods.
Forest bathing. That sounds amazing. I need to look into that. So are we talking about like replacing our morning coffee with the trip to the woods?
Not necessarily. It's about finding what works for you and integrating it into your life in a sustainable way. So maybe you can't escape to the forest every morning, but could you maybe commit to, taking a 15-minute walk in a nearby park a few times a week?
Yeah, that's definitely doable. And what about it, like those of us who are feeling really burnt out, like we need a more serious intervention?
Well, that's where the concept of, a longer retreat comes in. It doesn't have to be, a month-long silent meditation retreat in the Himalayas, although those can be incredible. It could be a weekend getaway, to
Wow.
a cabin in the woods, a solo trip to a new city, even just a staycation at home where you disconnect from technology and just really focus on self-care.
I've always been curious about those silent retreats.
Hmm.
Is it really as intense as it sounds?
It can be challenging for sure, but it can also be incredibly transformative.
Yeah.
When you strip away, all the external distractions, you're kind of forced to confront your own thoughts
Yeah.
and emotions, which can be both liberating and terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like facing your inner demons head on.
Exactly. And it's not for everyone, but for some people, it can be a really powerful way to, break old patterns, gain clarity, and reconnect with their, true selves.
So we've talked about the benefits of retreat, the different types of retreats, and, how to incorporate small moments of stillness into our daily lives. But here's the big question. Why do we resist? Why do we resist taking time for ourselves? Why do we feel guilty for stepping back from the hustle?
It's a complex issue, but I think a lot of it stems from, our societal conditioning. We live in a culture that values productivity above all else.
Mm.
We're constantly bombarded with messages that tell us we need to be doing more, achieving more, striving for more.
It's like hustle culture has become the new norm. Like if you're not constantly busy, you're somehow falling behind.
Exactly. And this relentless pursuit of, productivity can leave us feeling exhausted, stressed,
Yeah.
and ultimately disconnected from ourselves and what truly matters.
It's like we're so busy chasing, external validation that we forget to connect with our own like internal compass.
Exactly. And that's why retreating from society is so important. It's about creating space to reconnect with ourselves, to listen to our, inner wisdom, and to make choices that are aligned with our values, our true purpose. It's about giving ourselves permission to, to be, not just to do.
So how do we actually shift this mindset? How do we like overcome that guilt
Yeah.
and start prioritizing our own well-being?
Well, for starters, we need to recognize that taking time for ourselves is not selfish. It's essential. It's an act of self-care, a way to replenish our energy, nurture our well-being. And, when we're feeling grounded and balanced, we're actually more productive and effective in like all areas of our lives.
Wait, so taking a break can actually make us more productive in the long run. That's counterintuitive, but I like it.
Exactly. It's like trying to, run a car on empty. Eventually, you're going to break down. We
Yeah.
need to make sure we're filling our own tanks so we can, keep going.
That's a great analogy. So it sounds like retreating from society isn't about becoming like antisocial or abandoning our responsibilities. It's about creating a more sustainable pace of life that allows us to, to thrive, not just survive.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot where we're, engaged with the world in a meaningful way, but we're also taking care of our own needs so that we can show up fully, authentically.
I love that. It's about finding that balance between being on and being off,
Mhm.
between doing and being.
Exactly. And it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's about constantly checking in with ourselves, noticing when we're feeling depleted, and giving ourselves permission to step back and recharge.
So what are some practical tips for incorporating more solitude and reflection into our lives? Because let's be real, it's easy to say, take a break, but it's a lot harder to actually do it, especially when we're feeling the pressure to be constantly on.
That's true. It takes conscious effort,
Yeah.
but it's definitely doable. And the good news is, it doesn't have to be complicated. Even small changes can make a big difference.
Okay, give me some examples. I'm ready to take notes.
Well, for starters, think about your digital habits. Could you commit to maybe like putting your phone away for an hour each evening? Maybe during dinner or before bed?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm definitely guilty of like mindlessly scrolling on my phone way more than I should.
We all are. It's so easy to get, sucked into that vortex. But just imagine like how much more present you could be with your loved ones or even just with yourself if you weren't, constantly checking your phone.
That's a good point. I know I've missed out on some great conversations because I was too busy staring at a screen.
And it's not just about being present with others. It's also about being present with yourself. When you're constantly bombarded with notifications and updates, it's hard to connect with, your own thoughts and feelings.
It's like our minds are always racing, always
Uh,
processing external stimuli that we forget to just like be.
Exactly. And that's where those, small moments of solitude come in, even if it's just 5 minutes of sitting in silence, focusing on your breath, taking a walk in nature without your phone. Those little breaks can make a huge difference in your, overall well-being.
So it's about creating those little pockets of stillness, throughout the day, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the more natural it will become. It's like building a muscle. The more you know, exercise your ability to step back and recharge, the stronger it becomes.
I love that analogy. So it sounds like the key is to start small, be consistent, and find what works for you.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things and see what resonates with you. You might be surprised at what you discover.
This has been so insightful. I'm already feeling inspired to, create my own little retreat routine.
That's great to hear. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Be kind to yourself and celebrate those small victories along the way.
Okay, I'm feeling motivated to make some changes. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Right.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. The idea that taking time for ourselves can actually make us more productive and successful in the long run.
Oh, absolutely. It might seem counterintuitive, in our always on culture, but it's true.
Can you elaborate on that? Like, why is it that stepping back can actually help us move forward?
Well, for one thing, when we're constantly pushing ourselves, we're more likely to make mistakes, to burn out, and ultimately to become less effective.
It's like trying to sprint a marathon. You're going to crash and burn pretty quickly.
Exactly. We need to pace ourselves. And that includes taking breaks, to rest and recharge. When we give ourselves permission to step back, we create space for our minds and bodies to recover, which allows us to return to our work, with renewed energy and focus.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Precisely. And it's not just about, physical energy. It's also about mental clarity and creativity. When we're constantly bombarded with information and stimuli, our minds become cluttered. And it's harder to think clearly and to come up with new ideas.
Yeah, it's like our brains are overloaded with data and can't process anything new.
Exactly. But when we create space for, silence and stillness, we allow our minds to declutter and to make new connections. It's in those moments of, quiet reflection that we often have our biggest breakthroughs.
So those aha moments are more likely to happen when we're not actively trying to force them.
Exactly. It's like our, subconscious mind needs time to process information and to come up with solutions. And sometimes the best way to facilitate that process is to simply step back and give our minds a break.
That makes so much sense. It's like we're giving our brains permission to do their best work behind the scenes.
Exactly. And when we return to our work after a period of, rest and reflection, we're often surprised by, how much easier it is to focus, to solve problems, and to come up with creative solutions. It's like we've, cleared the mental cobwebs and our minds are operating at peak performance.
So taking a break isn't just about, relaxation. It's about setting ourselves up for greater success in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. It's about investing in ourselves, both personally and professionally. And it's an investment that, pays dividends in the long run.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm definitely feeling inspired to prioritize those moments of stillness and solitude.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination. Start small, experiment, and find what works for you.
Great advice. And on that note, I think it's time for us to take a little break ourselves.
Sounds like a plan.
We'll be back in a few minutes to continue our deep dive into the art of retreating from society. Stay tuned.
So, before the break, we were talking about how retreating from society can actually boost our productivity and creativity.
Right. It's kind of mind-blowing, isn't it? It seems so counterintuitive, but taking a step back can actually propel us forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a more focused, intentional way.
Yeah. And think about all the great thinkers and artists throughout history who've relied on periods of solitude and reflection to fuel their work. From philosophers wandering in nature to writers, seeking inspiration in quiet cafes. There's a long tradition of recognizing the power of stepping away from the noise.
That reminds me of something we touched on earlier, the societal pressure to be constantly busy and productive.
Yeah.
It's almost like we've been conditioned to feel guilty for taking time for ourselves.
But it's so true. It's like we've bought into this idea that busyness equals worthiness. But here's the thing, constantly striving and pushing ourselves to the limit, it's not sustainable. It leads to burnout, exhaustion, and ultimately a diminished sense of, well-being.
So how do we break free from this cycle? How do we give ourselves permission to prioritize our own well-being without feeling guilty or we're, falling behind?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize that like taking care of ourselves is not selfish. It's essential. It's like, putting on your own oxygen mask before assisting others. If we're not taking care of our own needs, we're not going to be able to show up, fully for anyone else.
That's such a powerful analogy. Yeah, we can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly. And it's about like reframing our relationship with productivity. True productivity isn't about, constantly doing. It's about making progress towards our goals in a sustainable way, a fulfilling way.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Precisely. It's about focusing on what truly matters. Delegating or eliminating tasks that drain our energy, setting boundaries to protect our time and well-being.
So it's not about becoming lazy or like unproductive. It's about being more intentional with our time and energy.
Exactly. And that includes making time for, rest, reflection, rejuvenation.
Okay, so let's talk about the practicalities of, incorporating retreats into our lives. You mentioned earlier that it doesn't have to be extreme. What are some like small manageable steps we can take to start creating more space for, stillness and solitude?
Well, one of the simplest things you can do is, create a digital detox ritual. Maybe it's like putting your phone away for an hour each evening or, designating certain days as tech-free days.
Ooh, I know I need to work on that. My phone is like practically an extension of my hand these days.
It's a common challenge these days, right? We're so used to being constantly connected that it can feel like uncomfortable to disconnect. But the benefits are, they're so worth it. You might be surprised at like how much more relaxed and present you feel when you're not, constantly checking your phone.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like giving your mind permission to breathe.
Exactly. And another like simple strategy is to incorporate mini retreats into your day. This could be, as simple as taking a 5-minute break to like step outside and breathe in some fresh air, or closing your eyes and doing like a short meditation at your desk.
I love that. Yeah, those little moments can make such a difference, especially when we're feeling, stressed or overwhelmed.
And don't underestimate the power of nature, even a short walk in the park. Paying attention to the sights, sounds, smells, that can do wonders for your mental clarity and emotional well-being.
Oh, I'm a big believer in nature walks. There's something so grounding and like calming about being surrounded by trees and greenery.
Yeah. And there's actually a scientific basis for that too. Studies have shown that spending time in nature can, reduce stress hormones like cortisol and improve our mood.
So it's like a natural mood booster.
Exactly. And the best part is it's accessible to almost everyone. You don't need, fancy equipment or expensive memberships. You just need a bit of green space and a willingness to, be present in the moment.
I love that. It's such a simple yet powerful way to like reconnect with ourselves and find a sense of peace amidst, the chaos.
And if you're looking for like a more structured approach to retreat, there are countless options available. Everything from like weekend workshops to week-long retreats at, dedicated centers.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Hmm.
What are some of the different types of retreats out there, and how do you know like which one is right for you?
Well, there are retreats focused on, everything like meditation and yoga to creative writing and personal growth. There are, silent
Yeah.
retreats where you commit to a period of silence and introspection.
Mm.
And there are retreats that involve, group activities and workshops and like shared meals.
Wow, there's really something for everyone.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
the best way to like find the right retreat for you is to think about, your goals, your intentions. What are you hoping to gain from the experience? Are you looking for like deep relaxation and stress reduction?
Hmm.
Or are you seeking, personal growth and transformation?
That's a great point. Yeah, it's like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And it's also important to consider like the setting and the style of the retreat. Do you prefer like a rustic, nature-based setting? Or are you more comfortable in, a modern urban environment? Do you prefer like guided activities and structured schedules? Or are you more drawn to like a self-directed approach?
Wow, there are so many factors to consider.
It can feel overwhelming for sure. But the good news is there are like resources available to help you find, the perfect retreat for your needs and preferences.
Like what?
Well, there are, websites and online directories that list, retreats by location, type, and price range. You can also like read reviews from previous attendees,
Yeah.
to get a sense of the experience.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like the key is to do your research,
Hmm.
be clear about your intentions and choose a retreat that, that feels aligned with your values and your goals.
Exactly. And remember, it's an investment in yourself. It's an opportunity to step away from the demands of, daily life. Reconnect with your inner wisdom
Yeah.
and return to your life feeling, refreshed, renewed, inspired.
Beautifully said. Okay, I'm feeling inspired to like start planning my own retreat.
That's wonderful. And remember, it doesn't have to be, a grand, expensive getaway. Even a simple, overnight trip to a nearby town can be, incredibly restorative.
That's good to know. Yeah, sometimes a change of scenery is all we need to shift our perspective and gain some clarity.
Absolutely. And the beauty of a retreat is that it allows you to, create a container for yourself,
Yeah.
a space where you can disconnect from the outside world and just focus on your own, needs and desires.
Yeah, it's like hitting the pause button on life for a little while.
Exactly. And in that pause, we can, reconnect with ourselves, listen to our inner wisdom, and make choices that are, aligned with our values and our true purpose.
So it's not just about escaping from the world, it's about coming back to ourselves.
Precisely. And that's ultimately what, retreating from society is all about, rediscovering our own, inner sanctuary
Yeah.
so we can navigate the world with more, grace, ease, authenticity.
I love that. Yeah, it's about finding that inner peace
Yeah.
and then bringing it back into the world with us.
Exactly. And that's a gift we can give not only to ourselves, but also to, everyone around us.
So we've talked about the importance of taking breaks, the different types of retreats available, and how to, incorporate small moments of stillness into our daily lives. But let's dive a little deeper into the concept of solitude. Why is it so important, and how do we distinguish it from isolation, which can have a more, negative connotation?
That's a great question. Solitude and isolation are often confused, but they're actually quite different. Solitude is about, choosing to be alone, to create space for reflection,
Mhm.
introspection, creativity. It's a deliberate act of, self-care,
Mhm.
a way to reconnect with, our inner selves and find a sense of peace and stillness.
So it's about embracing the quiet and finding joy in our own company.
Exactly. And it's not about, withdrawing from the world or becoming antisocial. It's about creating a balance between, our inner and outer worlds, between our need for connection and our need for solitude.
It's like finding that sweet spot where
Yeah,
we feel, both connected and grounded in ourselves.
precisely. And isolation, on the other hand, is often, unwanted and can lead to feelings of loneliness, disconnection, despair. It's a state of being cut off from others, either physically or emotionally, and it can have a negative impact on our mental and emotional well-being.
So solitude is about choice,
Mm.
while isolation is often imposed upon us.
Exactly. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two because solitude has so many, benefits, both for our individual well-being and for society as a whole.
What are some of those benefits?
Well, for one thing, solitude allows us to connect with our own thoughts, feelings, values. When we're constantly surrounded by other people, it's easy to get caught up in their expectations and
Mm.
opinions. But when we're alone, we have the space to reflect on, who we are, what we believe in, what truly matters to us.
Yeah. It's like tuning out the noise of the world
Yeah.
and tuning into our own, inner compass.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly, empowering. It allows us to make choices that are aligned with, our authentic selves rather than choices that are based on external pressures or expectations.
So solitude can actually help us become more confident
Yeah.
and self-assured.
Absolutely. And it can also, boost our creativity and problem-solving abilities. When we're constantly bombarded with information and stimuli, our minds become cluttered and it's harder to think clearly and to come up with new ideas. But when we create space for solitude, we allow our minds to declutter and to make new connections.
Yeah, it's like we're giving our brains permission to wander and explore new possibilities.
Exactly. And in those moments of, quiet contemplation, we often have our biggest breakthroughs. It's like the answers we've been searching for were there all along, but we needed to, create the space for them to emerge.
That's fascinating. So solitude isn't just about relaxation and rejuvenation. It's also about unlocking our creative potential and finding solutions to complex problems.
Absolutely. And it's not just about our individual benefits either. Solitude can also have a positive impact on, society as a whole. Well, when we take time for solitude, we're more likely to develop empathy and compassion for others, When we're not constantly caught up in our own dramas and distractions,
Mhm.
we're more able to see the world from, other people's perspectives.
So it's about like expanding our capacity for understanding and connection.
Exactly. And that's essential for building a more just and compassionate world.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I'm
Hmm.
starting to see like solitude in a whole new light. It's not about being antisocial or withdrawing from the world. It's about, cultivating a deeper connection with ourselves.
And with others.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's something that's becoming increasingly important, in our fast-paced, hyper-connected world.
Okay, so let's talk about, how to actually incorporate more solitude into our lives. What are some practical tips for carving out that space for quiet reflection amidst the hustle and bustle of, daily life? Well, for starters, I think it's important to reframe our relationship with being alone. We live in a culture that often equates being alone with being lonely or unsuccessful. But the truth is, solitude can be incredibly, enriching and fulfilling.
Yeah, it's about like reclaiming the joy of our own company.
Exactly. And it starts with small steps.
Yeah.
Maybe it's committing to spending, 15 minutes each morning in quiet reflection, whether it's through meditation, journaling, or simply, enjoying a cup of coffee in silence.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
And
starting your day with a mental cleanse.
exactly. And as you get, more comfortable with solitude, you can gradually increase the amount of time you spend, alone. Maybe you start taking a solo walk in nature once a week, or you commit to spending a weekend by yourself at a retreat center.
Okay, those are all great suggestions. But what about those of us who feel like we're constantly surrounded by people, whether it's at work, at home, or, in our social lives? How do we find solitude in the midst of that?
That's a great question. And it's definitely, a challenge, but the key is to get creative and find, small pockets of solitude throughout your day. Maybe it's, taking a few minutes to step away from your desk and go for a walk by yourself, or listening to a guided meditation on your lunch break.
So it's about being intentional,
Yeah.
about creating those moments of solitude, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Exactly. And it's about, setting boundaries. Maybe it's letting your family or roommates know that you need some time alone each evening, or turning off your, phone and email notifications for a few hours each day.
Those are great tips.
Yeah.
It's about protecting our time and energy so we can, recharge
Yeah.
and show up more fully in all areas of our lives.
Absolutely. And as you start to, incorporate more solitude into your life, you might be surprised at how much you enjoy it. You might even find yourself craving those moments of, quiet reflection.
Yeah, that's what I heard from, people who practice solitude regularly. They say it's like a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it.
Exactly. And the benefits are, they're well worth the effort. When we create space for solitude in our lives, we invite clarity,
Hmm.
peace, a deeper connection to ourselves and the world around us.
Beautifully said. Okay, so we've talked a lot about, the benefits of solitude, but I'm curious to hear about, your personal experiences with it. Have there been any times in your life when solitude has been particularly transformative or insightful for you?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I can think of a specific experience that really, solidified my understanding of the power of solitude. It was a few years ago, and I was going through a pretty challenging time in my life. I was feeling, overwhelmed, stressed,
Mhm.
and disconnected from myself.
Yeah, I can relate to that feeling. It's like you're lost in a fog and you can't see your way out.
Exactly. And at that point, I knew I needed to make a change. I had been reading about the benefits of, silent retreats, and I decided to take the plunge and sign up for a weekend retreat at a center in the mountains.
Wow, that's brave.
Ah,
I've always been curious about silent retreats, but I've never quite had the courage to, try one myself.
I have to admit, I was a bit apprehensive at first too. The idea of being completely silent for an entire weekend felt both, daunting and intriguing.
So what was it like?
It was honestly one of the most transformative experiences of my life. At first, it was incredibly uncomfortable. My mind was racing, and I felt the strong urge to talk, to connect with others. But as the hours turned into days, something shifted. The
Right.
constant chatter in my mind began to, quiet down, and I started to connect with a deeper sense of, peace and stillness
Yeah.
within myself.
It's like all the external noise faded away,
Yeah.
and you were finally able to hear your own, like, inner voice.
Exactly. And in that silence, I had some profound insights
Hmm.
about myself and my life. I realized that, I had been living on autopilot, going through the motions without really being present.
Yeah.
I had been so focused on achieving like external goals that I had neglected my own, inner needs and desires.
So the silence allowed you to reconnect with, your own values and priorities.
Exactly. And it also allowed me to, develop a deeper sense of compassion for myself and for others. When you're stripped of all the distractions and external validation, you're kind of forced to confront your own humanity, your own, flaws and imperfections. And in that process, you realize that we're all just doing the best we can with the tools we have.
That's such a powerful realization.
Yeah.
Like the silence, like stripped away all the layers of pretense and allowed you to connect with, your own true self.
Exactly. And it was a humbling experience. It made me realize that I don't need to be perfect, that I'm worthy of, love and acceptance just as I am. And that's a liberating feeling.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's like releasing the pressure to be someone you're not
Mm.
and embracing your own unique, beauty.
Exactly. And that's, one of the most powerful gifts of solitude. It allows us to see ourselves more clearly, to accept ourselves more fully, and to live more authentically.
So the silence wasn't just about quieting the mind, it was also about like opening the heart.
Exactly. And that's what I love about solitude. It's not just about, withdrawing from the world. It's about deepening our connection with ourselves and with, everything around us.
This has been such an inspiring story. Thank you for, for
Mhm.
sharing it with us. It really highlights the transformative power of solitude
Yeah.
and the importance of creating space for quiet reflection in our lives.
It's my pleasure. And I encourage everyone listening to explore the possibilities of solitude in their own lives. It might be a bit uncomfortable at first, but the rewards are well worth the effort.
Great advice. And on that note, I think it's time for us to take a little break ourselves.
Sounds like a plan.
We'll be back in a few minutes to continue our deep dive into the art of retreating from society. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Life Unfiltered. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like so much more grounded after that story. About the silent retreat, I mean.
Mm.
It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves, right? When we create that space for quiet reflection.
It's true. Yeah. It's like we're constantly, bombarded with information and stimulation
Yes.
in our daily lives. And it's only when we like step away from all that noise that we can really hear our own inner wisdom.
And it's not just about like quieting the mind, is it? It's also about, connecting with our hearts, our intuition, and our deeper sense of purpose.
Absolutely. Yeah. When we retreat from society, we create a space where we can connect with our values, our passions, and our dreams. It's an opportunity to, reevaluate our goals, to let go of what's no longer serving us, and to make choices that are, aligned with our authentic selves.
We've talked a lot about like the individual benefits of retreating from society, but I'm curious to like explore the societal implications as well. What happens when we, as a collective, start prioritizing solitude and reflection? Do you think it could lead to like a more mindful, a more compassionate, a more sustainable world?
I absolutely believe it could. Yeah, when we take the time to connect with ourselves, we become more aware of our own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and that self-awareness can like ripple outwards, influencing our interactions with others and our relationship with, the world around us.
It's like a domino effect. Like
Huh.
the more individuals who embrace solitude and reflection, the more compassionate and mindful our society becomes as a whole.
Exactly. And I think we're already seeing signs of this shift, like happening. There's a growing interest in, mindfulness and meditation and other practices that cultivate inner peace and awareness. And there's a growing recognition of the importance of, self-care and mental well-being.
That's so encouraging. It's like we're starting to like wake up to the fact that our well-being is interconnected, that we can't like create a thriving society without, prioritizing individual well-being.
Exactly. And when we create a society that that values solitude and reflection, we create a space where people feel safe to, slow down, to be present and to connect with their, their deeper selves. And that, I believe, is the foundation for a more compassionate, a more sustainable, more fulfilling world.
Beautifully said. Okay, so for our listeners who are feeling inspired to, to incorporate more solitude and reflection into their lives, what are some final words of wisdom or encouragement you'd like to leave them with?
Well, first of all, I'd say, be gentle with yourselves. It's a journey, not a destination. There will be times when you feel resistance, when you feel like you should be, doing something else, when the noise of the world feels, overwhelming. And that's okay. Just keep coming back to, to your breath, to your body, to that quiet space within.
Yeah. It's about progress, not perfection,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And remember that solitude is a gift you give yourself. It's an act of self-love, a way to nourish your soul and replenish your energy. So make it a priority, even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
And what about those of us who, who feel like we don't have the time or the space for solitude? Any tips for incorporating it into like our busy lives?
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a grand, elaborate affair. It can be as simple as taking a few minutes to sit in silence, to go for a walk in nature, or to listen to like some calming music. The key is to make it a regular practice, something you do for yourself, without guilt or judgment.
So it's about finding those little pockets of stillness throughout the day, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Exactly. And as you start to, incorporate more solitude into your life, you might be surprised at how much you enjoy it. You might even find yourself like craving those moments of quiet reflection.
And who knows, it might just inspire you to take a longer retreat,
Hmm.
to really dive deep and, explore the depths of your own being.
It's a beautiful possibility. And I encourage everyone listening to give themselves permission to, explore that possibility.
This has been such an enriching conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you for creating this space for such an important conversation.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the art of, retreating from society. We hope it's inspired you to find those moments of stillness, to connect
Yeah.
with your inner wisdom, and to create a more mindful and fulfilling life for
Mhm.
yourselves and for the world around you. Until next time, take care and be well.